Mighty in stature and strong even by the standards of the Adeptus Astartes, the Storm Giants have a long and illustrious campaign history, including fighting at the Third War for Armageddon. In this video we're going to show you exactly how to paint the armour of the Storm Giant Space Marines, using this Primaris Intercessor, which we've already undercoated with Wraithbone Spray. Now once the spray is dry, it's time to apply the base coat to the armour, and for this we're going to use Ironrack Skin. Grab yourself your large base brush and let's do this. First of all, let's take some Ironrack Skin and apply it to our palette here. Now, as it's a base paint, we're going to add a bit of water to help thin it down to make sure it goes onto our model real smooth. Perfect. Then load our brush up and it's onto our Storm Giant Space Marine. Here, we're going to apply this all over the armour like so. You can afford to be quite quick here and apply nice big coats. You're going to hit other parts of the model that aren't going to be armour eventually. That's fine. You'll be able to go back later on and paint those in. You may find as well, as you apply this, that the first coat goes on quite thinly, so you may need to go on and give a second coat after the first one's dried. Apply this to the entire armour, and once it's done, we'll move on to the next stage. That's a nice solid base coat of Ironrack Skin all over the armour. So up next, let's have a look at shading the armour down. And for this, we're going to be using Agrax Earthshade and a small airbrush. Here's how. Now for this, we're taking a small amount of Agrax Earthshade onto the palette like so, and just applying a small amount to our brush. We're not doing an all-over wash here. We're just going to be very carefully painting this into the recesses. So make sure you've got a nice small point on your brush. Perfect. Then onto our Space Marine. Here, we're applying this into the recesses of the Space Marine's armour. So if you can see here, we're very carefully just working it around like this, where two armour panels meet. So the deeper places or the recesses like this. Now this is going to take some time to do, but make sure you're being as neat as you possibly can and go across the entire armour doing this. If you do make a mistake and any splodges happen, not a problem. Grab your pot of Ironrack Skin and go back over it and correct it. And that's the shade applied all over the armour. Alright, up next let's have a look at highlighting the armour up to make it stand out a bit more. Here we're going to add two highlights. First of all, a highlight of Deepkin Flesh, then a highlight of Pallid Witch Flesh over the top of that. And for both of these we're using our small airbrush again. Let's take some Deepkin Flesh from the pot here and onto our palette. Now the first highlight on the Space Marine wants to be quite subtle, so we're going to add a little bit of water here to make sure it dries a bit more translucent. Bingo, perfect. Then onto our Space Marine. Here we're adding these highlights all over the edges of each of the armour panels, so you can see you're just going to be drawing very thin lines around the edges of all of the armour panels. It'll be quite subtle to start with, but as you go on it'll become more noticeable. Just take your time as you're going around the miniature, try not to make any mistakes. But if you do, grab that pot of Ironrack Skin and correct them. And for the second highlight, this time we're using Pallid Witch Flesh, which we thin down again with a touch of water, and we're applying to the very edges of the armour here. On some of the stronger vertices, like the shoulder pad rim, and the gorget, and the backpack, you can use the edge of the brush to get a nice, strong highlight. And that's the cream armour painted. But there's one last thing to do here, and that's to paint the red of the Storm Giants too. Storm Giants wear a single red shoulder pad on their right, and also their chest eagle or Aquila is red too. Now for this we'll start off with a base coat of Corn Red, then we'll shade into the recesses with Black Templar contrast paint. Once that's done, we'll highlight up with Mephiston Red and Wild Rider Red respectively. First of all, that base coat of Corn Red, and for this we've turned to our medium layer brush again. Let's take some Corn Red from the pot and onto our palette here. Now, as always with the base coat, we're going to add a little bit of water here just to thin it down a touch to help it go on real smooth. Then onto our Storm Giant miniature. Here, we're painting this one shoulder pad here on the miniature's right-hand side like so. We're also going to paint the Aquila as well, so once the shoulder pad's done, make sure you paint the chest eagle red too. Next up, we're shading the recesses of the red with Black Templar contrast paint. Here, we're using a small layer brush and being really careful just to hit the red areas like so. Next up, we've taken some thin down Mephiston Red with a small layer brush and used it to highlight the red like this. On the inside of the shoulder pad, we're also going to paint the Aquila as well. And the last highlight here is Wild Rider Red, which we're going to place inside the highlight we just applied. Once this highlight is done, we're going to go back and paint the rest of the model with a Baden Black, so you can get ready to paint the rest of the model later. And there we go, with that, the armour is complete. And that's how you can paint Storm Giants for your Space Marine army. I hope you enjoyed the video. Happy painting.